I welcome you all with love, everyone. We actually start with a prayer. And the prayer is emerging the heart and the mind, okay, and the heavens and the earth. And just like keep that in mind as we do that. L'Shem Yukud Kudusha Brihu Ushinate Bi'ilu Imu Udilu Biaktad Bishem Biyuke Bivavke Biyudash Bishem Ko Israel Ko Amen. So just take a moment and integrate the heart and the mind, heavens and the earth. Good. Now, I always tend to like to start my talks with a little bit of dance, which I invite you all to participate in. We'll dance for about 3 minutes. Why is dancing important? Particularly with age, you want movement, you want strength, you want coordination, you want integration of your different muscle systems. And you also want to activate the inner joy. So dancing activates all those levels in a way that gets you kind of ready to do what you want to do. So that's why we dance. Okay. Then we have a little bit of meditation. I've been meditating for 50 years, so we I've been teaching meditation for 50 years, but we're going to just meditate for a little bit. But for those of you who want just a little bit more about it, in 1995, after the end of a 21-day water fast, a mantra came to me, the name of God, that was different than what I had been using for the last 30 years. And that is Yod, Hey, and then Yod on the in breath, Hey on the out breath, Wah up to the third eye, and then Hey on the out breath. Integrating, again, the heavens and earth. And it's the name of God as grace. So it activates grace in your life. Now, that's for people who may want a mantra, and maybe a lot of people already have a mantra. But you repeat the mantra until your mind's quiet, then you're in meditation. Another part of this is just the very traditional and really pretty much all the spiritual paths is the transfer of energy. So focus on my eyes for a few seconds, and then we'll go in meditation for 3 minutes. And then we're about ready. Then we're at the talking level of starting. So let's start with a little dance. second. I just focus on my eyes and let that energy come through. And we go into meditation with the yod. Yod. And now in the meditation. Okay. Yod. Now we're going to come out of meditation. And here we go. So before I talk about nutrients or supplements, I really want to put things in perspective. Okay, what does that mean? The research shows, as I said in my last lecture, that people in relationship, this was done in women, but it applies to men maybe even more so, have 49% less mortality rate. That's highly significant. Okay, so relationship is very, very important. That's intimate relationship, but also lesser so, but also for just social relationships. They're very, very important in your overall health. The other piece that's very important in your overall health is being conscientious. And they track, this is like Dr. Turner, an 80-year study, and they follow people all the way into, at the end of the 80 years, they start with kids who were 5 years old, and the kids that were most conscientious became adults who were most conscientious, and they were the ones that had paid the most attention to their health. And they got 5 years more longevity, which is really quite a lot. And then the willpower behind that, and also regular exercise, at least 4 times a week for maybe 20 minutes minimum. And that seemed to make a really difference. And then we add meditation, and the research shows that people who meditate for 20 minutes a day for 5 years have a physiology that's 15 years younger. That's very impressive. And then we find that adequate sleep is very important too. Because if you aren't getting adequate sleep, what is that? 7 hours sleep, and starting before, say before 11 o'clock, some people say 10 o'clock, but getting to bed relatively early seems to be very important, because sleep is a time of rejuvenation. And then, finally, we're talking about nutrition and the best diet. Now, one of the big mistakes that confuses people is that we have different constitutions. It's a constitutional issue. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm just joking. The point is, some of us need more protein, and some need more protein and fat, and some people need more carbohydrate. So the people who we call fast oxidizers, that's just a term that got used in the 1930s, began to be used, is people who need a higher protein fat content in their diet. And their dietary needs are really different. If they don't get enough protein or fat in their diet, they'll be hungry an hour later. People who are what we call slow oxidizers need more carbohydrate. Now, I don't want to overdo this because generally speaking, when we look at the longevity diets, contrary to unfortunately what some people have focused on in the kind of vegan movement, it is more higher protein and fat and lower carbohydrate. Now, I recommend in terms of protein, 10 to 15% protein, and in fat, and I'm talking about plant fat, avocados and so forth, olives. I'm talking about 25 to 45% of the diet, and the carbohydrates around 25-35% in the diet, something like that. And that's a piece. Now, if you're a fast oxidizer, you may need more protein. So there's not one number for everybody. And part of the issue is we have to figure out what that is for us, because we're unique individuals. We're not cows whose diet is grass. Okay, we're more complex. So if we don't acknowledge our own complexity and we'll get someone else to tell us, then we're not going to be, let's say, the best, most refined diet. So part of the work that I'm talking about is we really have to, according to our Constitution, refine what our diet is. Okay, what's our really breakdown? Now, it's also a moving target. Now, how's that a moving target? Well, when you're a kid and you're growing up, you need your 3 meals a day. Well, for me, at the chronological age of 82, I'm eating 1 meal a day. Okay, that's all I need. In the morning, I have a little bit of supplements and cacao and goji berries and things. And I just have one main meal, which is not a lot. It's a salad and some kind of something, entree of some sort. So everybody's a little different. Some people need to eat 3 times a day, no matter what. So really, after 1 o'clock, I'm done eating for the day. That's it. So again, I want to make it clear that we all are unique individuals. So as I talk to you, I want you to keep that in mind. Now, what I also want you to keep in mind is it changes with your age. So when you're pre-puberty, you're going to have a more kapha diet. It's going to put on strength and muscle and weight, okay, because you're growing. Then you're a teenager, and that's more pitta, what we call fiery. The animal's a tiger, a kapha diet is an elephant, okay? And you're going to have something that's going to give more fire because that's what you are. You're a fiery teenager. And then after that, then you move to what we call a stabilizing vata diet. And that is going to have more oil and more kind of enduring things, but it will be more fat and oil in your diet for everyone. So we have diet according to our age and our life cycle, also according to the seasons. That's another part of getting good diet. So all these things are at play, and it's our responsibility to figure out for ourselves. There's the big broad strokes, and then what's key. So once we've kind of gone through that level of figuring it out, then we can kind of get, start talking about supplements. Now, there's lots of ways to think about supplements, okay? So, for example, I do a lot of work with herbs, and I look at herbs as medicinal and as what we call ongoing or longevity herbs. So there are really 4.5 longevity herbs that are associated with people that have lived a long time. Now, there's some Chinese people who have lived 267 years, not a lot. And so I look at all those longevity diets, and they all had reishi, is a really important herb, goji berries, different ginsengs. Those are your top 3 longevity herbs. And then heishu wu is another longevity herb, those top 4, and then some people do gynostemnia. My experience is those top 4 are the ones I tend to use, and those are the herbs that people took and have taken and take for longevity. Okay, these herbs I take actually too, and they're not like pep you up herbs. They're steady building and maintaining type of energies, and they're also spiritual. So when I went to China, I was kind of looking at their whole Taoist thing and the Taoist herbs. It's clear that reishi is a spiritual herb. Okay, that's primarily how it's seen, and truly goji berries too, and then also ginseng plays a role in that too. So that's all I want to say about the herbs. These are what I've just given you, the longevity herbs. The medicinal herbs, that's a totally different story, and they're used medicinally. We're not going to get into that. That's a course in herbology. It's interesting. Herbs really work. I use herbs a lot, but for our purposes, I'm looking at longevity. So what are our purposes? Well, I'm looking at, you can take a look at supplements in lots of different ways. And the question that I raise, and this is how I look at it, is what's important is to feel vital, awake, and alert all the time. Full of energy all the time. A superconductor of the divine all the time. Okay? That's 1. 2, to be able to go about your life taking care of business. So, I'm dancing, I'm doing this, lifting heavy things, whatever. I'm not having physical limitations. So in terms of what to me a reasonable goal is to have enough muscle mass and strength that you have no actually limitations in your life, and have enough inner energy that you also don't have any limitations. You just can go all day, okay? Which is the way it is for me, and where it is for most people. That's how I gauge, because I see people privately. I gauge, how's this working? How's their energy? How's their every aspect of their life working for them? So those are like important criteria of what we're doing. Do you have enough energy to lead your life fully and with joy? Now, from a spiritual point of view, I'm going to add one more thing, which is important to me, is that I talk about being a superconductor of the divine. Now, what I mean by that is that we have our bloodstream, we have a lymphatic system, and we also have a subtle energetic system. They're called nadis. There's 72,000 nadis. There's a central channel called the Sushumna. Meat, fish, chicken, and dairy clog that flow of that energy. And through those channels, you're dealing with more, what we call more divine energy. Okay, and people talk about it in different levels and different traditions, but it's a more subtle spiritual energy. So the idea is to have a free flow of that energy through your whole system. So that's why in most spiritual traditions, not every single one, but in most, 99% of them, they recommend a vegan diet. No milk, fish, or chicken. There used to be milk, for example, in the Indian diet. Well, that was a time when the atmosphere wasn't polluted and the grass the cows weren't eating wasn't polluted. Okay, there was a time when dairy was there, but at this point, the spiritual diet in the Indian system, the Vedic system, really following what they're saying, is really what a sattvic diet, and there really isn't really dairy in it, although originally there was. You needed the B12 and it also created a certain balance, but today everything's so polluted that functionally speaking, dairy is no longer sattvic, from my point of view. Now, traditionally, you go to an Ayurvedic person, they'll say, yeah, a sattvic diet includes dairy, okay? I understand that, but functionally speaking, it's not, because the dairy is so polluted. So that gives you kind of a little bit of a feeling for it, of how we want to look at it. And so we're talking about our age, and we'll talk, sex plays a little bit of a role. Women do live longer than men, generally speaking. When men and women become vegans, the men add 7.2 years to their life and the women add 4.48 years to their life. Okay, in general, the woman lives 3.6 to 4 years longer than men in general. So there are some obviously variations. So I'm bringing that up as I look at that whole kind of overall picture. Okay, now there are, I'm going to say, different pieces of longevity. I just mentioned to be functional. Now, with age, past 50, people tend to lose muscle mass. Well, you may have heard I do a little bit more physical exercise with the push-ups and sit-ups and different things, and you don't need to lose muscle mass. So you want to do enough exercise to maintain your muscle mass. That's just kind of a basic in that. Another piece to that is the genes. Are we eating and taking nutrition to maintain our gene organization? Now, with age, the genes can tend to get a little disordered. And there are certain things that help with that, but generally we're looking at a supplement input that does that. Now, for example, I work with a special kind of iodine. It's scalar wave activated iodine. It's called Illuminine. That's just the name I gave it. But the point is, what does it do? It organizes the p53 gene, which helps organize your gene sequences so they don't get out of sequence. So they're able to work right. And the gene expression stays more as it has been. It also, the Illuminine organizes the gene repair, because we have a lot of things that disrupt our genes at this point, from radiation to the junk food to many issues going on in our environment. And so it helps repair the genes, reorganize them back to its original alignment. And then one other thing is what we call telomeres. Telomeres are like the tips of the genes. And with age, if we aren't restoring the telomeres, they get shorter and shorter and shorter until we aren't able to organize our DNA anymore, and then you die. Okay, so the key here is eat in a way that keeps the telomeres at their original length. And this illuminating helps do that. So, but there are more. It's not just illuminating. So I'm going to look at how do we protect the telomere length of all our chromosomes in our genes. Turns out that folic acid helps integrate and maintain that, and so does B12. They both help with that. And then B2, B5 also, and then vitamin D3 is a big, actually a big player. And then we have zinc, folate. Good question, folate. Zinc, iron, vitamin C, and vitamin E, and I already mentioned D, and the omega-3s. There's DHA and EPA. Now, in my book, written in 2000, gosh, it's 25 years ago, Depression Free for Life, I talk about DHA and EPA. And I'm just going to make a point, because actually in the last talk was not as clear. The research shows that we need more DHA than EPA, but we need both. And the DHA is important for brain growth, memory, clarity of mind, in specific. Whereas EPA, as I talk about in Depression Free for Life, I'm also a psychiatrist, I also use the EPA for treating manic depressive psychosis, and it really does make a difference, it really helps. But the DHA is a big player. So women, during pregnancy, they're giving their DHA to the baby, which is a reasonable thing to do. Why? Because you need it for brain growth, brain integration, brain function, brain evolution, okay? So often mothers, because I watch this during pregnancy, I'm always checking, and I recommend DHA particularly as a supplement, because often the mothers become DHA depleted. Baby gets a DHA, that's the way it should be for its brain growth, but we have, and the result is postpartum depression. When you're really depleted in DHA, you get postpartum depression. So, I have gotten 100% success in treating postpartum depression with DHA. I'm not going to give dosages because everybody's a little different. I figured that out individually. But it makes sense. You're giving your DHA to your baby, which the baby needs, and now you're depleted. Unless, what I recommend, of course, is to take DHA as a supplement during your pregnancy, so you don't get depleted. That's an obvious thing. Okay, so that being said, DHA, I've had 100% result in the last 50 years of healing postpartum depression within a few weeks. So the long-chain omega-3s are very important. In general, they're very, very important for brain development, brain growth, and also muscle development, which is interesting. EPA and DHA, you really need both. And usually we think they're from fish, which is, usually people get it for sure, But as a person who doesn't eat animal products, meat, fish, chicken, and dairy, I had to go looking around and say, where do the fish get the DHA, EPA? They get it from yellow algae. So there are extracts available. Again, I'm not going to give you brand names, but on my website you can get it, of a mix of EPA, DHA from yellow algae, totally vegan, totally clean, and different than the fish, because the fish are higher on the food chain, and so they have a lot more, I'll put it, toxins in the EPA, DHA, just by the nature of it. So that just gives you an idea of how important it is to pay attention to the details, being conscientious. Okay, now, what is another big issue? It's called inflammation. Generally speaking, with age, there's a growing inflammation in the body. It's particularly true in the brain. Okay, the microglia cells, okay, which are kind of repair cells, begin to break down and get inflamed with age. And suddenly your brain is inflammation. Well, inflammation is a degeneration. The whole idea of everything we're doing is we want to decrease inflammation, which increases with age. That kind of makes sense. So what are we doing? Well, besides fasting, which is really phenomenal for inflammation, really, really good for osteoporosis, we offer fasting retreats twice a year. The next one's in the Dominican Republic on June 1st, coming up, a 7-day fast, and that does really decrease the inflammation. So, short of that, what are we going to do about the inflammation? So, there are certain supplements that we can take to decrease the inflammation. One of them is resveratrol, okay, which when you get in most known in red wine and chocolate, okay. Quercetin, very strong antioxidant, very, very good for reducing inflammation and a variety of chronic disease. Inflammation is connected with most chronic diseases. Green tea, and 3-4 cups of green tea a day. You can also get it as an extract. Has epigallocatechin gallate, which is very anti-inflammatory, and it's good for cancer too and so forth. But we're talking inflammation. That is a real problem with aging. I want to be really clear about that. So part of what we're doing with supplements is dealing with the inflammation part. Now, so the green tea, and then vitamin C, very important for inflammation. And there's a thing called apigen, and that's a flavonoid. And it's good. And then rutin husperin, they're part of the vitamin C complex. And there's a thing, I don't know how many people have heard of, but it's something I actually take, it's vinpocetine. And it particularly is working on the brain cells and the axons, okay, to reduce brain inflammation, vinpocetine, to reduce brain inflammation. You've got to have a working brain inflammation, you get memory loss, lack of clarity of mind, lack of concentration, lack of intellectual function. It's a big deal. Another one is luteolin. And it is good for inflammation of the brain. It's good for inflammation of the microglia cells. It's also good for your vision as well. It helps increase brain size. It helps boost memory, luteolin, okay? And then bromelain is very good anti-inflammatory. So we have to address inflammation. Now, of course, you want to not have highly excitatory junk food in your system. I mean, that's more common sense. But we have to be able to deal with that in a good way. And this is a simple way to do it with the foods, with the fasting. The vegan diet is less inflammatory, and animal-based diet is more inflammatory. So that's important. Okay. Now, there's a few more things that help with inflammation, but as we kind of move that way, I just want to say I'm going to move a little bit into, but folate, where are you, my folate and folic acid? But these things convert back and forth. I'm going to say folate. So what we're talking about, I mentioned the telomeres now. I mentioned inflammation. I'm mentioning, again, building muscle mass, which also has to do with dancing and balance, everything we're talking about. It's very straightforward. CoQ10, ubiquinol is also an important supplement with that. Now, the omega-3s, EPA, DHA, also feed into this, okay? They activate an enzyme called telomerase. And what that does is it keeps your telomeres at more optimal length. And they can reverse even the shortened telomeres. And then vitamin K2 plays a role too. So basically, when people were given vitamin K2, they actually found that in animal studies that they live 7 years longer. Another important nutrient. Now, I want to just interrupt myself and kind of go back to orthomolecular psychiatry, which isn't a term used that much anymore, but really was how I got started, and that was in the early 70s. And that's when that whole field got started. And basically, it was balancing the brain neurotransmitters with supplementation. And the main supplementation was B3, B6, B12, and magnesium. Those are your four big players. And then also vitamin C was a player in that too. Now we know also vitamin D is a major player. So magnesium is important because it helps with the DNA replication, DNA repair, RNA synthesis, and it also increases telomere length. So magnesium is a big player in brain physiology. Now, along with that, there are certain polyphenols, which are super antioxidants in general. I mentioned resveratrol, and resveratrol also activates SIRTIN1, which gets the kind of growth hormone processes going. Also, a very good source of the polyphenols is cacao. It's very good for the brain and very good for the heart. I know people have, it does other things too, sexual activity and so forth, but it's brain and heart that we're talking about. And then I mentioned the green tea. Now, along with this is one other herb that I think comes up a lot is curcumin. Curcumin and turmeric are interrelated. They increase your anti-inflammatory and also the immune function. And vitamin A also plays a role. People suggest at least 10,000 to 25,000 of A. Now, vitamin B9 is known as folate. We got this folic acid folate going on, but there's a little bit of conversion, but the folate plays a role with this too. Now, those are kind of some of the players in the longevity department here. So now I've talked about a little bit with the muscle mass, with exercise and so forth, but we're also talking about keeping the genes working right. Optimum gene expression, optimum telomere length. So these are what are going on here. And so everything I mentioned to you helps with optimal gene expression. Particularly, I'm going to say vitamin D3 and resveratrol. The concept, again, just repeating this one more time, is to, at whatever age, you're living life effortlessly. Doesn't mean you get out of breath when you're dancing or you're doing push-ups. I mean, you're able to move fluidly through your life. You not have any physical impairments or energy impairments in your life. Okay? And I'll just make it clear, 50% of the people over 65 do have muscle loss. Now, I'm going to just add one more thing, is that the reason I talk about the push-up thing, and like this morning I did my 1,600 push-ups, okay? I do that on a regular basis, is we have to replace, we have to work harder. So at any age, we can get more flexible, we can get stronger, we can get clearer, but you also have to work harder. So if I'm not really doing this kind of work, 3-4 days later, I drop and how many push-ups I can do. That's my measure, okay, honestly. And so if I drop below that 1,600 mark, because I didn't do something for 3 days or 4 days, that is what we all face. We have to keep that effort up. We have to keep working, okay? You don't get to rest in that way, but you can get better, quicker, and stronger with age. So there's two pieces to that story, if that makes sense. So I want you to kind of keep that in mind. Now, I mentioned about omega-3s. I'm just going to mention they do boost muscle mass. That's the EPA, DHA. And vitamin D boosts bones and muscles. Okay, so we have all those things. Now, it's true for men, more true for men than women, but testosterone plays a role. Now that begins to drop, particularly after the age of 50, and as people are less healthy, even before that. So we need to do things to build that. And then women also need a certain amount of testosterone, and that builds muscle mass. It also helps build and protect the heart and the brain. So we want to kind of keep those in mind in this kind of bigger picture. Now, what I have noticed is one supplement called creatinine. It tends to be a very safe way to build muscle mass, but it also rehydrates muscle cells. So that's another thing to consider. And then the amino acid leucine. It seems to be helpful in decreasing catabolism, which is a medical word for muscle breakdown. Anabolism means muscle growth, just to get clear, and to help build muscles. So how do you keep your testosterone up? It's a really, really good question. There are herbs that build testosterone. I'm not going to go into all of that right now, but there are herbs. I tend to prescribe a thing called Testoven from a particular company, and these are all vegan herbs that are using to enhance testosterone, and it's for men and for women. So be clear about that. Women do need testosterone as well, obviously not as much. But the point I'm making is that there's a whole thing of herbs out there, and that is something we sell on our website, Dr. Cousens Global. Okay, so I'm just saying that we're not here to market, so I'm being a little bit limited about talking about those things. But it's there. Testoven. It's a good company, all vegan. Okay? I mean, everything I recommend from them is all vegan. So that's how you can build it. Let me say it a different way. You're not using testosterone, you're taking precursors that activate in men and women testosterone production. Okay, men make estrogen, men make testosterone. Obviously, then it varies, obviously with the sex, what you're gonna make more of. But the point is we make all those. And progesterone. So these are herbs that stimulate the body to produce those hormones. That's the way I generally prefer all this to happen, rather than take a testosterone supplement. Okay, that's kind of, or an estrogen supplement. We work with menopause that way. We do things to build it up without necessarily taking that. I can't answer the hair growth under the chin. Does testosterone do that? If that's your question, I think it does. And I'll just say that there's a balance, and you have to find the right balance for yourself. If you're taking testosterone, Testoven, which is getting you to produce more testosterone, then it may be that you have to figure out another way of dealing with hair under your chin. You can't, it's not always so perfect. It's really a good question because it comes up. But that's what you kind of have to do. You have to look at the balance. You want stronger muscles, stronger heart, stronger brain function, increased sexual energy. Then you may want to take, these herbs that stimulate testosterone production. So that's kind of a way of thinking about it. Now, along the way, I am going to make a point as a psychiatrist to avoid SSRIs. These are antidepressants. Not only do they have a very poor success rate, they actually increase your rate of stroke disease and heart attacks. It's up to a 45% increase in stroke with SSRIs, and a 32% increase in death. So not only do you get poor success with it, but in my book, for example, that's 25 years ago, but it's still active. Depression Free for Life is that you can build those things up naturally in a variety of ways, all of which I'm covering. So now I'm going to just mention exercise. I mentioned it vaguely before, but it does increase serotonin, which everybody needs, and particularly post-menopause, we want to increase the serotonin. Dopamine, which is a pleasure kind of neurotransmitter, okay, and norepinephrine. So these things protect against the stress hormones. they increase insulin sensitivity, which means you need to produce less insulin, which is very good. And they stimulate neuron growth. Now, I'm going to mention about brain rust. What's that? Really, it's oxidization of the brain. And blueberries are the best for treating brain rust, because they're superb antioxidants for the brain. Really important. What about some other nutrients for brain health? Okay, because I've kind of looked at it in different ways. And one is phosphatidylserine, which is actually very important, particularly important for vegans. But phosphatidylserine increases concentration, memory, clarity of mind, and neuron membrane integrity. And it's really important. Along with that comes choline, which is a component in acetylcholine, which is the main neurotransmitter, a main neurotransmitter in the brain. So choline is a good supplement, and there are different kind of choline supplements, which again, I've kind of isolated what I think are the top ones. DHA, I already mentioned for the brain, EPA, and the antioxidants. And there's a particular one, astaxanthin. It's extremely powerful. It's 550 times more powerful than vitamin E. That's pretty good, okay? And 65 times more potent than vitamin C. So that's something I add into the kind of brain ones. Rosemary is good. Now, one thing my wife Shanti's done is she's actually created a rosemary hair oil. So it's kind of going in that way. And I think it's good. That's what I use actually. And then, so that's going in, literally going into your brain. But it's also good for your hair and your hair color. Okay. Now, alpha GPC is very good for raising the choline. And along with choline, we got red cabbage and sweet potatoes and raspberries, things like that, that are good. Now, another thing that comes up is sleep. A lot of people have trouble with sleep. And one of the best supplements for sleep is really tryptophan. And it converts to serotonin. And that's generally extremely good for you in general. Okay? And when serotonin decreases, you don't sleep as well. And there's increase in depression and weight gain. Now, these are very typical things we see with postpartum adjustments, postpartum depression, which again is pretty easy to treat when you kind of understand that. So I'm mentioning that, and tryptophan also converts to melatonin, which also helps with sleep. Okay, and there's our 5-hydroxytryptophan as well. But the point I'm making is, it's really generally a really good herb for postmenopause, menopause. Now, depression increases with age. And again, with age, you're getting the pro-inflammatory cytokines. That's a little bit of a problem, right? So I'm making the point that all these things are affected. And the pro-inflammatory cytokines make the tryptophan go down. So we take tryptophan, we're countering that. Okay, and then calcium also helps. I don't really recommend calcium as a supplement because we get enough of it. But along with the pro-inflammatory cytokines, which is where I started earlier about everybody inflames more, keep that in mind, everybody inflames more with age, we're doing anti-inflammatory type things. which, I like the green tea, borage oil, curcumin, the different flavonoids, they're all counter the inflammation. And of course, fasting really helps reset that, okay? So the other thing that happens when your serotonin goes down, tryptophan goes to serotonin, but when that goes down, you tend to crave carbohydrates, which is not so good for you, and does lead to obesity as well, and depression and anxiety. So we need to make sure that you are getting tryptophan as a supplement, and it really does help with sleep. Take it a half hour before bedtime. I'm not going to give amounts, but it's important. So these are really key things. And I'm going to mention the B vitamins here: B2, B5, folate, and B12 are very important for brain nutrition and brain regrowth, brain function, and mental state. They're very, very important for that. Okay, so we want to keep that pretty high in the system. And that's kind of how I approach it. So I do recommend we have a certain amount of that. And it's got to be organic, and it can't be synthetic. And synthetics work for a short time, and then they're not so good for you. We covered a lot with the brain, okay, and that, of course, is to me most important in the whole picture. Now, I'm going to go back to telomere shortening, because with telomere shortening, our immune system goes down. There's more of a tendency for type 2 diabetes, which is an area I do a lot of work in. There isn't really a whole food so high. There isn't a vegan food that's high in tryptophan. That is a problem. You can get it in things like turkey. Okay, but here are again, the key nutrients for life extension, which is pretty much the same ones that are good for the brain anyway, are going to be your B12, zinc, vitamin D, omega-3s, DHA, EPA, vitamin C, vitamin E. So those are, your key. Now, I'll mention iodine again, okay, because not only is it the best antioxidant, not only is it very specific for repairing the DNA sequences, activating the different gene, putting them back in order, but it also forces out fluoride and chloride from your pineal pituitary system. Now, the technical term we use is competitive inhibition. So they're in the same chain, iodine, chlorine, fluorine. So when you increase your iodine in your system, you're forcing out fluoride and chloride, which are more toxic to your system. So those are things that are pretty important in that picture. So that's a little bit why the illuminating is important. Not only does it reorganize and replace your genetic sequence, which is important, but it it is also forces out these toxins and poisons from the system. There's one more point here. Okay. So I'm going to talk about sources, food sources for the polyphenols. We have the, grape leaves, cacao is a good source, I mentioned, and the green teas, very good in the polyphenols. So the folic acid, I'm just going to address a little bit more. They're kind of synonymous, okay? It's vitamin B9, and we really, really do need that, and they really do increase the telomere length. And I'll mention the curcumin again because it's very important as an anti-inflammatory, and then vitamin A plays a role too. So those are all pieces that actually help the thing. Now, I mentioned luteolin before, and it does protect, spread the word, it's free, okay. Luteolin really protects about the inflammation in the brain, particularly in the area where memories are formed. It increases nerve growth factor, which is what one of the hormones that helps build, create new neurons. And in that way, it protects against brain shrinkage. It's interesting, but in fasting, we have a stimulation of brain growth, and we actually have an increase of about 1% on the brain with regular fasting. So that's a good one. I mentioned the alpha GPC for acetylcholine. These are all about the brain and memory and mind. And phosphatidylserine, which does improve brain performance by like 44%. Okay? And some of the research suggests it cuts up to 12 years off the age of your brain. Okay, blueberries, brain rust. Lecithin actually serves as helps transfer alpha GPC across. Ginkgo biloba, Gotu-kola. Calcium helps form memories, but I don't recommend that as a supplement. And phosphorus helps maintain proper brain wiring. We do get enough phosphorus. So those are things for the brain, which is for the body too, but more important for the brain. And then, of course, the omega-3s play a really important role, the EPA and DHA. So that's a little bit more what we have to say about the brain formulas that are important. I mentioned the lecithin because it lines your nerves, which is important, but it also helps transport fat across, like phosphatidylserine. So those are for the brain. Now, what else besides the brain? Because it really helps the whole body. It helps the DNA formation, and so all those things are truly benefited in that way. Now, lately, particularly for mitochondria function and production, because mitochondria, what I've noticed is that with age, the mitochondria decrease, and people lose their vitality. Okay, so I'm kind of looking at things that help that, and PQQ, CoQ10, and then all the antioxidants, resveratrol, antioxidants like vitamin C and E, alpha lipoic acid, they're also good. Sulfur plays a little bit of a role. They're all good. lutein is maybe one of the better ones for brain inflammation, so I'm going to highlight that one for people to keep in mind there. In the big picture of things. So those are some of the ideas that can, I think, make a difference in your overall kind of life situation. I didn't really emphasize the green tea. You can get it as an extract, so you don't have to drink a lot of tea, but it specifically, because this is like a brain herb, green tea is a brain herb, it decreases the risk of dementia. Okay, if you're drinking that like 5 times a week, people who did that have less mental decline, less dementia. So compared to non-tea drinkers. Now the epigallocatechin gallate in specific is a whole body antioxidants. Okay, glad you like it, Tracy, it's good. But it lowers your blood pressure. It maintains your weight at a right level, decreases rates of cancer, increases your energy. It helps energize the mitochondria, which are where the energy factories are. It also contains theanine, which is an amino acid which helps relax you, and it increases GABA-aminobutyric acid production, which also is a neurotransmitter that creates relaxation. Now, all the teas come from Camellia sinensis, black tea, green tea. It all has to do with the fermentation process, how long they're buried in the ground, and things like that. My wife is a tea expert, and we talk about how this whole process is, and it's a whole alchemy that goes on with the green teas and the black teas and the different types of teas. Pure air tea is another really, really good tea that's out there as part of this whole line of teas. So black tea, green tea, they come from the same plant, just to be clear about that. Black tea tends to oxidize as it moves into flavonoids. They have similar amounts, but the green tea has less oxidation, okay? And it creates a higher level of the phenols and antioxidants for that reason. That's why I tend to like the green teas as a better thing, like matcha green tea. That's the whole tea leaf, okay? So the green tea is almost 30% polyphenols, which is pretty good. And it's higher in theanine, which means you're going to get more relaxation, more GABA production. It produces more serotonin, dopamine. So there's a lot more relaxation and tuning in with it. I'll put it that way. So what are the benefits of green tea? Okay, this herb. It decreases mortality from all causes, mortality from heart disease, lowers your blood pressure, decreases oxidative stress, decreases chronic inflammation. Remember, that was like one of the number one things we talked about the whole aging process. It increases blood flow, relaxes the arteries. They have high green tea drinkers, I don't know, maybe it's 3 cups or more a day. They have a 28% less decrease in memory. And it lowers LDL cholesterol and triglycerides. And so those are kind of some of the goodies of the green teas thing. It also increases vitamin D, so it helps bone growth. It helps protect against getting cancer. Again, it relaxes people, which is probably one of the main reasons they have it. It increases energy and relaxes you at the same time. That's kind of good. So it's obviously 1 to 3 cups. It's brain health, clarity of mind, brain relaxation, lower risk of dementia. So if you're going to drink a tea, the green tea is a good choice. It's been used for about 5,000 years, going back to time in China. It was discovered in 2737 BC. It's a long time, okay? And again, the matcha green tea is probably it's a whole leaf, okay? So those are some of the things that we look at. Now, I want to go back to mitochondria before we kind of wrap up here. Mitochondria per cell, we have like 5,000 mitochondria per cell in the brain and 3,000 in the heart, okay? It's really important we maintain high level of mitochondrial function. So what are the problems that disrupt it? Obviously, we got to see the problem, folks. Figure out this thing. Oxidative stress, poor nutrition, environmental toxins, sleep deprivation, and mental stress. These are things that tend to create mitochondrial dysfunction. And mitochondria function goes down about 10% every 10 years. But we can regenerate, okay? And one of the ways is sunlight. And pretty much all the supplements I mentioned to you build the mitochondria. That's also the good news. And low-level mitochondrial stress, like any kind of muscle building, keeps it at a certain level. Okay, now, if you have an excess of omega-6, like linoleic acid, it does destroy mitochondria. It does create neurodegeneration. It does create insulin resistance and obesity, and gets the chronic inflammation going. So we want to avoid the omega-6 linoleic acids, okay, which are very, very high, in the processed foods. The other thing is melatonin, which we need for sleep, is produced in the mitochondria at 95%. So kind of keep that in mind too. So we want to kind of keep that thing going. Now, there's some research that suggests that methylene blue, which is a kind of a new thing there, it increases the mitochondria and anti-aging effect. And here's the best supplements for the mitochondria, being very specific. Okay, malic acid, resveratrol, apigenin, serotin, I mentioned that before, NAD+, leucine, niacinamide, PQQ, lipoic acid, berberine, bitter melon. These are herbs I mentioned in my book in the anti-aging thing. Nicotinamide, coca-cola, gynostemnia, remember that's a longevity herb as well. Inosine, N-acetylcysteine, creatinine, acetylcarnine, and obviously the green tea. So we're getting, I think, a fairly full picture in this endless kind of effort to kind of maintain and develop optimal health. And I think the key too is understanding is, as I've said now, I've said it a few times, you have to keep working at it. It's not overwhelming if you keep working at it. I'm also going to recommend that as you make that transition, you go one step at a time, master that step, and then add something, rather than trying to do everything at once. So if you try to do everything at once, it's easy to get overwhelmed and get discouraged. Kind of keep that in mind. You got to be kind of nice to yourself in the overall picture of that. So I'm going to just review for a second the inflammation issue because it's a major aging issue. So you want to avoid meat, fish, chicken, and dairy. They all inflame the system. We want to get adequate sleep. We do not want to overeat because that inflames the system. You have to get adequate exercise. Turmeric and ginger are really good. Limit alcohol, really just a ceremonial alcohol if you drink it all. The green tea because it increases the polyphenols. Fermented foods seem to help with the whole thing because they create a healthy gut, and the gut makes a lot of your neurotransmitters. It's a piece to understand. Avoid the gluten, inflammation, minimize your stress, avoid processed foods. And those are winners, you know, for what really works. One thing I didn't mention here, besides blueberries, is bacopa, which is a herb from India. It's really good for memory and brain function. It cuts senior moments down by 50%. Bacopa manuri is the official name. Okay? So you've gotten a pretty good feeling for it. What's important is to keep the big thing. We're talking about a total lifestyle, you know, which includes the meditation, includes, you know, these different supplements that make a difference. I want to mention something that has come up in different ways. It is confusing to people. It's the salt issue. And we got to be clear what we say when we're talking about salt. I am not talking about sodium chloride. I agree with the anti-salt people who say that salt isn't good, if that's what they're talking about. Usually that is what it is. And we're really talking about a 82 mineral salt. Usually it's mined, it's not from the sea. The problem with the sea is the ocean waters, sea waters are pretty contaminated. So we need a certain amount of salt. We always have. The Roman soldiers used to get paid in salt. And the salt keeps her hydrated. One of the big problems today is an issue of hydration. And adequate salt in your diet, 82 mineral salt, creates it holds on to water, so it keeps you hydrated. Now, some people say, oh, it's going to raise your blood pressure. Well, what happens here is it doesn't in the long term. In the short term, you may have a brief increase in blood pressure because when you're dehydrated, which is not good for you, it shrinks your brain, okay? You get a dehydrated brain, it shrinks your brain. But dehydration in general, the whole vascular system at the capillary level is shutting down. So when you take the 82 mineral salt okay? I call it transition salt, we call it. You begin to hold a certain volume. We want to be up to about 10.5 gallons of fluid. It increases your blood pressure as you're forcing your system to, again, expand its arteries and arterioles and capillaries. After a few days, then it stabilizes out. Now, most people don't have that as an issue. I'm just saying that's where the blood pressure thing comes, because it does happen in the transition. You stop taking the salt for a few days, go back to it, most likely you will not have an increase in the blood pressure. But increasing your blood volume means increased nutrition to all your cells and increased fluid in your system back to optimal fluidity. So that is kind of why being really hydrated is extremely important, okay? And sodium chloride doesn't really do that. But the idea of an 82 mineral, I'm going to say a mined salt, meaning it's not from the sea anymore, that is the best we have in the overall picture of how to deal with this. So the salt question isn't really a question, because I think there's misunderstanding, and all that gets kind of more or less taken care of when you just understand the basics of a temporary blood pressure increase, which doesn't really happen. The research doesn't really suggest it increases your blood pressure in the long term. So those are kind of some of the considerations that come up. I just want to make sure I answered that issue in this kind of bigger picture. So one other little detail, because it's confusing to people about oils and so forth, is the linoleic acid. It's a poison, okay? And so generally the oils that we use a little bit, okay? It is really those that are low in linoleic acid. Coconut is like 1 to 2% of coconut oil. Avocado and olive are about 10%. And all the other oils, like sapphire is at the 70%, grapeseed 70%. So canola is 19%. So what I'm getting at in corn oil, those aren't really aren't good for you. So we want to minimize that. Okay, that's the key in the whole process. So I think you have an overview. I just wanted to cover the salt issue. So really fully mineralized salt. Well, what's flax oil? Okay, hold on. I have it written down because I don't have it memorized. I actually don't see it. Grapeseed, sunflower, soybean, rice. I'm sorry, I actually don't have flax oil. I don't recommend flax oil for another reason, is that it decomposes. It oxidizes pretty quickly. So even though flaxseed ground, freshly ground is good, generally good for you, really once it's an oil, it very rapidly oxidizes. So I don't really recommend you use it, and particularly if you're going to heat with it, it's really going to break down pretty quickly. So that's the way I would say I would recommend. So you've gotten a pretty good overview. We focus on brain, we focus on muscle mass, we focused on brain function on multiple levels and the neurotransmitters, and keeping the telomeres at optimal length. And most important, do you have a fluidity in your everyday life? Are you moving freely? Can you dance with the dance of life? You know, those are reasonable goals that everybody can attain, okay? Is that we can dance with the flow of life. And therefore, when we're doing that, we get that joy of life happening for us. So I want to bless everybody before we go to questions and answers. Bless everyone that we are able to become superconductors of the divine and dance joyfully with the flow of life. Oh.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I really appreciate all the information that you shared with us today. So, if people wanted to follow your work and learn more about what you do, what would be the best way to get in contact with you or to follow your
Sure.
work?
They can go to drcousens.com
Okay.
or treeoflife.mn.co.
Okay.
And then for the fast, if people are interested, because that's a great way of making things work right, there we go. We can really go to Dr. Cousens Fast Retreat.co.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So let's go ahead and we can hop right into the questions. So in other talks, you talked about greens, having like a diet very full of greens. How do you keep full? Like, how do you feel satiated when you eat a lot of greens?
Well, again, it's a variable thing. I eat one salad and I'm full, okay?
Okay.
So how do I keep full? It's simple. I eat one salad a day. That does it. Now, I understand what you're saying. The issue we're dealing with is pretty much, my physiology is more as a slow oxidizer. Okay, it's no issue for me, like as a sun dancer, to go, really only one out of 80 people to go 4 days in the hot sun without food or water. Wasn't that hard, okay? Because I, as a slow oxidizer, I don't need to have that much. People who think about greens and get hungry in 1 hour, which is what you're talking about, right? They need to have more protein and fat. That's how they deal with it. Because their physiology says more protein and fat, not more greens. We want greens, but if you're getting hungry right away, that means you need more protein and fat, which will then be more sustaining.
And what would be some simple ways to add more protein and fat into our greens to make them more satiated for those fast metabolizers?
So nuts and seeds are reasonable starters. What I have found is that some people need more protein than that. And so then we look at protein concentrates. Spirulina, chlorella, the blue-green algae are 70%, 60 to 70% protein and 95% absorbed. That's huge.
That's
You think
chlorella.
meat, fish, and chicken are 16, 17, 18% absorbed, or, protein.
So that was chlorella, you said?
Chlorella, spirulina, blue-green algae. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was the percentage of protein?
60 to 70% and 95% absorbed. That's the highest percentage of any food I know. Eggs are 44%.
Okay, wow. All right.
So
Um,
it's an easy thing. That actually fills you up. People may need, in my clinical experience working with people the last 50 years, 1 to 2 tablespoons or something like that twice a day.
okay.
With your meal.
So you mentioned during your talk that that some people need to eat 3 meals a day. Could they get used to, is that just because they haven't trained their bodies to eat one meal a day or two meals a day? Or, or are they constitutionally different and will always require, they just cannot be trained to eat one meal a day?
It's a little of both. I mean, I grew up eating 3 meals a day. That's what everybody did in the 40s, in the 50s. It's like that's what you do.
Mm.
But over time, I began to feel like, wait, this is slowing me down. This is not taking me where I want to go. So we go to 2 meals. Then I say, well, I just eat, a nice meal at lunch. And then probably the last 10 years, 15 years, I only need 1 meal a day. And I don't like anything to slow me down. I like to be able to dance and move. And can't do that when you have a full belly. So, how do I judge whether I'm getting it right? I don't lose weight. My weight has been stable. I'm at my high school weight. Okay? And as long as I keep within 4 pounds of that, because when I fast, I'll lose 4 or 6 pounds and then I gain it back in a week or so. You see what I'm saying? So I have simple measurement. Am I full of energy? Am I quick, alert? And is my weight stable? If that's what's happening, then you know you're on the right track.
So one of the main barriers for a lot of people to eat healthfully is just being integrated in the world, the social factor. And if you're plant-based, for example, you go out to, with friends, and you're the you're the oddball, if you will, where you're not eating most of the stuff on the menu. Now, eating in a restrictive time window like that, how do people integrate that socially? Do you go out to dinner with people and they're eating and you're not eating? How does that work for you?
Well, eating early in the evening, still works, if that makes sense. It's not just what we do necessarily. Or we have people over for lunch, so we control the field. So we're social, we'll invite people to come for lunch, and, but you can also eat in the early evening, you just don't have a very big meal, that's all.
Okay.
You don't go out of your way to be different. I mean, I don't go out of my way to be different. It's enough just to this lifestyle. So that's how I look at it. I try to minimize it. Don't make a thing of it at the same time. Heck, this is what we do. Da, da. People say, well, we're inviting you for dinner. What can you eat? Well, salads are good, and some other side dishes. So we make people at ease. Because it doesn't matter that much. 1 meal, it's no big deal.
So okay. Another thing along the same lines is, people can drive themselves crazy trying to eat perfectly. There's even a term that I heard originally from Michael Pollan, orthorexia, right? Which is correct eating, and they kind of like making it into an eating disorder where people become obsessed about it.
Right.
And you start, adding in this nutrient and that nutrient, and especially when you're getting from supplements, um, you can really drive yourself crazy trying to find this magical optimal health, and you don't know it until you die, right? So how do we really, in a way that doesn't drive people crazy, implement some of the things that you talked about, maybe more so in food as opposed to supplements, and then talk about which ones are like the ones that you really believe, maybe the top three or top five, whatever, that you really believe are, essential to supplement. And if you could talk about ways of getting the other things through food, that would be really helpful.
Well, the thing is, we're not a bunch of cows, as I started. So we have to be I'm trying to be very careful about saying this is what everybody should eat. Because people can really get off balance with that. Because we are unique. We have different constitutions, we're at different stages of our life. So I'm kind of saying that. Generally, sprouts, nuts and seeds, does it for a slow oxidizer. And then if you're a fast oxidizer, you need to take more protein concentrates. And how do you know things are going well? Your weight stays stable, or you lose weight till you get to your optimum weight, and you're not hungry, and you feel active, and you feel alert, and you're having a good time. These are all really important things that all count in the big picture.
So, you spoke about DHA and EPA, and we've had different doctors talk about how they test for that. You know, before they recommend supplementation, they would make sure that people had enough of it in their diet and that they were testing their blood. Do you believe that everyone just needs to take the some sort of supplement for it, or do you believe that we should really kind of be looking and seeing how our individual bodies are handling it before we start supplementing it?
It's a good question, and I think again the answer, first of all, thyroid tests are 50% accurate, blood tests are 80% accurate. That's 20% is a big experimental error. So we have to be very careful about going with these tests as if that's what they know what's going on. So it's good to look at these things from different ways, like different forms of muscle testing, O-ring testing, that are simple stuff you can do for yourself. Second thing is you gotta see how you feel. Now, I will generally tell you, most everyone is somewhat deficient in EPA and DHA. Do you need a lot? Well, that's something you have to kind of work out. Does this work? Does this not work? Remember, the EPA, DHA also build muscle mass. They're really good for mental functioning. I use it in people like a depression. The DHA is very good. Manic depression, EPA is very good. Postpartum depression, DHA is good. In other words, it's got to fit the situation. Now, does everybody need a supplement with that? Almost everybody I see that I test is deficient in the DHA and EPA. Generally, and more so with women if they've had children.
Is the fact that you're seeing that everyone is, almost everyone is deficient in DHA and EPA, is that something of modern life, or have throughout history have we been deficient in that, and just we're looking more for optimal health, whereas in more natural settings it was more about survival, not optimal health?
It's a mix of all that. It's a good question. In Africa, they prepare a woman for pregnancy after she's delivered for the next pregnancy. They take 3 years to build her up. And they give a lot of fish and things like that that are going to have the DHA and EPA. So there's awareness that you need it, not that you're using the word EPA and DHA. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So in general, women have had a fair amount of children are more likely to be low in it. But in general, because we aren't getting sufficient input, and it's very, we have a lot of mental tension and pressure, we're burning that stuff up. So that's why I generally have seen a lot of people being deficient in these things. That's where I'm coming from. It's more a clinical experience.
Okay.
And when I say deficient, I mean like the one I use is a thing called Omega-Zen. It has a combination of both. It has the EPA, DHA. I think it's 1,200 of DHA and EPA is 400. That's what people say is the correct thing. I know in the last thing, the other doctor had it reversed. But the point is you need them in different mixtures for your overall function, brain function, but also muscle growth.
Great, thank you. So what are the primary symptoms of being malnourished, not having the proper nutrients in our diet that you see? And what are the most common, and then what would be the supplements for those most common symptoms?
Well, slowness. People's minds are working slow. People's bodies are working slow. they don't feel good. They're not showing joy. They're not showing happiness. Life is a struggle. Somebody said something about what Omega Zen. You can get it on go to my website. We have Omega Zen. So they're living suboptimally, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And that's really what's going on. Then you have to diagnose, what are the key things to start rebuilding them up. And there are different systems. Like I use the Chinese system when I talk about Jing, deep life force, and Qi, everyday life force. Well, a person may be really low in their Jing, and I'm going to give them a combination of Jing herbs to build up that deep life force. Okay, maybe they're just low in Qi. Well, that's a different set of things, of herbs. So you have to kind of figure out where's the deficiency. But if you're really malnourished, your Jing, at birth, we're given a certain amount of Jing. And when that gets used up, that's a problem. So we have to build, so they're Jing building herbs. And our life stress and what goes on today burns that Jing up. So a lot of people I end up giving Jing herbs to because they're that deficient. They've entered their deep life force, and are burning that up. It's actually a pretty serious issue, because if you can't get your Jing up, it's not good.
So with regard to that, so you're talking about, more Eastern way of looking at medicine. If you go to an acupuncturist, especially a traditional one, they're not doing blood work. They're looking in your mouth, right, which is the only part of your body that you can really see into easily. And then they're taking your pulse and evaluating, different aspects of your pulse. Are we in Western culture overly obsessed with blood work as opposed to what you're talking about, which is how people actually present and their vitality?
I would say so, because we're dealing with, first of all, not everything we do is accurate. So you can take O-ring testing, you can take, a 12 or 24 pulse. Nothing's going to be 100% accurate. But the blood work is maybe 80% accurate. And so it's hard to want to, as a scientist, it's hard to really want to rely on that. I think it's one of the pictures. You want to take this picture, you want to take a pulse picture, you want to do some muscle testing. You need different pictures, and then you can make a reasonable conclusion of what's going on.
So, thank you. So, you mentioned, various things about living longer, like K2, you mentioned you can live 7 years longer by taking K2. Who is that in comparison with, right? Because we can't just like take K2, live 7 years longer, and then on top of that, take some other supplement and live 15 more years longer. I mean,
Right, I understand. It's a complicated thing. A lot of it's done with animal studies and then transmitted to humans, but you can also compare humans who aren't doing supplementation, who aren't taking K2, compared to humans who are. And you can get, so when I say for humans 7 years, that's been a comparative. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes. Okay, thank you. So SSRIs, you talked about strokes. There's, a whole bunch of various supplements with being on, and side effects, I'm sorry, with being on SSRIs. One of them is sexual functioning. How do people recover from like, sexual dysfunction after taking SSRIs?
Step one, stop the SSRIs. Okay. Step two, there are again, it's actually a big field in herbology of things that stimulate sexual function. And those are safe and good, because you have kind of rate limiting, because you can take, but the herbs for men, herbs for women are available for stimulating like sexual function. But you got to build the jing before you start thinking about sexual function, because if you're so depleted, you don't want to get more depleted. So there's a process of doing that. You have to build your baseline, and then you can do things that will stimulate sexual function. Yes, you could stimulate sexual function, but if you're already depleted, that's not so good for you.
Okay. So when you're okay, so here's what I'm hearing with what you're referring to as Jing, which is you kind of have to get your baseline and heal and build your whole health profile
Deep life
first.
force. Deep life force. That's the key
Keep
word.
life first. Okay, which is Jing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you can worry about the more refined aspects of it, such as sexual health. Let's say your Jing is is in full swing. And um what what would you then do for recovery?
Well, again, I'm hesitant to give. There are lots of herbs in the different systems. South American herbs, Chinese herbs, that was a big deal for the Chinese, is the sexual functioning, that are specific for that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
you gotta see which herbs are what people need.
Okay. So there could be a whole manifestation of problems that have similar symptoms, but actually have different root causes. Okay.
Or you need, because of your constitution, this herb rather than that herb.
So you talked about brain rust and and the oxidation.
The blueberries.
Right, right. Within the context of the potency of blueberries. So what is brain rust? Is there, I've heard that there's like
It
metal in
means
our,
oxidization. It means your neurons are oxidizing and therefore they're being destroyed.
okay. And does metal in our brain, like aluminum getting in there and stuff like
I,
that,
I
or
understand.
iron?
That's the problem with the metaphor. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, aluminum gets in the brain. Iron gets in the brain, particularly with postpartum women or hemochromatosis. And that's, it acts as a toxin to the brain. But when I'm referring to it metaphorically, I'm talking about oxidized brain cells.
Okay. All right, perfect. Um, when you mentioned a particular supplement that cuts senior moments, what are senior moments? Is that early onset dementia of some form, or is that just a normal part of aging outside of dementia?
Okay, so let's not consider senior moments part of aging. Let's say with age, if people don't take care of themselves, they can have senior moments. Your memory fails, you blank out, you can't remember an address. You're just not, your memory just isn't as sharp, so you lose it in that moment. Maybe 10 minutes later, the answer comes to you. So there's a delay in the thinking process somehow.
Okay.
It's
Um,
not necessarily Alzheimer's. It's something that happens to a lot of people who aren't taking care of the brain. The brain isn't quite as sharp. And
okay.
that can happen with age if you aren't taking care of it. My point is, let's not assume that's going to happen. My point is, it can happen if you aren't taking care of your brain mind function. But it's not a given.
So you talked about mine salt being better. You mentioned that sea salt has contaminants. We've had some speakers on in the conference talk about how they're finding microplastics even in the mine salts now.
Well, we live in a very polluted environment. So the question would be, honestly, where are you going to get your least amount of microplastics? You're going to
Right.
get in the ocean or you're going to get mine salt. How deep is the mine? So you can, yeah, practically speaking, you can only go so far. Okay, you go to a deep mine, you're going to have less microplastics. But we have contaminated the earth. It's a big problem.
So and we also had a speaker talking about we were talking about salt and why some people feel they need salt is that, they sweat it out when they exercise. And the speaker said that you shouldn't really be sweating out salt. And what that happens because people have too much salt in their body, and so their body's getting rid of the salt. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't accept that at all. I'm an athlete. I always sweat it. You're out there, tennis and football, and it's hot. You sweat. That's your way of cooling off. That's your natural way of dealing with, some toxins in the body so you can better function. So I don't believe that it's not natural not to sweat. I've never seen anyone who doesn't sweat,
No, they didn't say not to sweat. They actually recommended doing things to sweat. They were talking about that it wasn't, if you didn't overconsume too much salt, you didn't sweat out salt in particular. So he said sweating is great. Just you shouldn't be sweating out salt.
I don't, for the best of my knowledge as a medical doctor, okay, you're sweating out certain minerals, and it's sodium chloride and other minerals that are there, plus lead, mercury, cadmium. You're sweating out excess, but it's like your third kidney. You tend to eliminate those as part of an overall balance.
So one of our listeners is asking about testosterone. What you referred during your talk. Can you repeat that?
Well, my point about testosterone is there are a variety of testosterone building herbs that stimulate you to make your own testosterone. I don't recommend taking testosterone. I recommend taking herbs that stimulate you to produce testosterone.
Okay.
And in different cultures, whether it's the Chinese or African or South American or American, there are different herbs, depending on what system you use.
So ashwagandha and amla, I've heard a lot about. I don't think I heard you mention those, but I understand they're very powerful in the Ayurvedic space. What are your thoughts on ashwagandha and amla?
Amla is vitamin C, just to be clear. Okay, it's obviously a mix, but it's vitamin C. Ashwagandha is a great tonic. It's not necessarily a sexual tonic, but it's a great overall tonic. I use it a lot in people for building Jing and also Qi. Qi being the daily life force, Jing being what you're born with.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Say that again.
Qi is your daily life force.
Okay.
Jing is your deep life force, the energy of which you're born. There are some people that just born stronger than others, and some people a little weaker than others. That's your Jing.
Okay. All right, perfect. And that's a perfect place to end. So I guess we'll all work to kind of rebuild our Jing and our baseline, and then kind of breathe in the Qi. So thank you so much for your time, Dr. Cousens. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I love doing the dance along with you with my camera off.
Good.
At the beginning. I do really appreciate you bringing that into the conference. If we can,
I just want to bless everybody again, that I hope this has been useful. And go one step at a time and just keep increasing all these levels of who you are. Blessings to everyone.
Great. If we can unmute the audience, please, so they can show that appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Oh,